It's never been a more exciting time actually to work within a health and safety and wellbeing role.
Who wouldn't want to be involved in safety?
I'm Tim Eldridge. I'm the Global Head of Health and Safety for HSBC.
I'm Amanda Owen, the Safety, Health and Wellbeing Director at Heathrow Airport.
I'm the Director of Health, Safety and Security for the British Red Cross.
You know, it's as much about safety as psychology.
For me, health and safety shouldn't be seen about stopping things. It's how can you make things happen safely.
Social distancing, good hygiene that we won't take for granted, and we will reinforce that message continuously.
The thing to remember is that even in adversity, there's an opportunity. People are now talking about health and well-being.
Coming out of all of this, there's one word that springs to mind, and that's pragmatism.
You have to encompass a whole brand of expertise to make things work for the good of people and for the good of organisations.
There is a need and a demand for the industry to keep going.
Actually, this is a great time for people to be focusing on their development. And I think Safety for Good's got a huge role to play, and I'm very much looking forward to working with you guys to shape the future of our profession.
Make sure I'm off mute. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this Safety for Good webinar we're hosting today on the follow-up to our Inside Safety series. So last year, coming out of the first wave of the COVID-19 pandemic, we interviewed 30 HSE leaders to understand their thoughts, feelings and perspectives of how the future would play out for their health and safety functions. We also interviewed a wider 300 health and safety professionals at all levels to understand their predictions as well for the next 12 months. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by a star-studded panel of HSE leaders across a range of industry sectors. We want today to be interactive, so ask your questions in the Q&A function, and we'll be delighted to hear from you throughout the webinar. So to our guests, I'm delighted to be joined firstly by Amanda Owen, MBE, the Safety, Health and Wellbeing Director at Heathrow Airport.
Hello, everyone.
Richard Byrne, Group Director of HSE and Fleet at Travis Perkins PLC.
Afternoon.
Louise Ward, HSEQ Director at Siemens Mobility.
Hi.
And Andrew Kavanagh, Chief Risk Safety and Programs Officer at Co-op Property.
Hi, everyone.
So, as I mentioned at the beginning, we want this to be interactive. And to start with, we wanted to ask you a question with regards to your own business. So we have two questions from a poll, and this is around the commercial performance of your organisation in 2020 and how that compares to 2021. So if you can see on the screen in front of you, you'll have a poll that comes up. If you could answer this in the next 20 seconds, that would be fantastic. Just give you 10 more seconds. And if we could have the results up on the screen. So quite a cross section, which perhaps will showcase throughout through the panel today as well as to how business was performing and how it is performing now. The reason I wanted to speak about this is commercial performance is obviously the cusp of any business, and whilst health and safety can be spoken about as the #1 priority, or maybe it actually is, if there is no commercial performance within a business, there will be no health and safety. So I wanted to reflect upon this across the panelists today. Perhaps Amanda, if you wouldn't mind starting, could you give us a flavour of how Heathrow has performed throughout this time? I'm sure it's been quite challenging, but perhaps some facts and figures to share with us all about the organisation.
Thanks very much, Josh. And if I'd completed that poll there, I would have put significantly underperforming, or perhaps the one above that wasn't showing. So pre-COVID, Heathrow would serve around 220,000 passengers a day. At the lowest point in 2020, we were at 5% of that. And today, as I sit here, we're at about 10,000 passengers a day. when the pandemic hit, we've remained open throughout the pandemic, but at the early start of it, it was really very much for cargo and essential supplies and very, very minimal travel. We've seen that nudge up slightly, but as I say, we're substantially down in terms of passenger numbers. And you may be aware that we posted losses of over £2 billion for the last financial year. So an incredibly challenging environment from a passenger perspective. I think we all know the reasons why for that. And from a colleague perspective, because those numbers have led to significant change in the organisation. So very briefly, in terms of our property, we have reduced operations to 2 terminals. We still have over 550,000 assets to maintain, but we're now operating out of 2 terminals. From a people perspective, across the whole of Heathrow, pre-pandemic, we had about 75,000 people working, of which 6,000 worked directly for my organisation. We have had tens of thousands of airport passes handed back across Team Heathrow, such as the impact on the aviation industry, including our own. Our management structure has been reduced by a third. As you all of our people in support functions are working from home, our frontline colleagues have been reduced as well. And from a process perspective, we have had to fundamentally change numerous processes, the latest example being opening a terminal, closing 2 terminals, and then opening one back up again for a red arrivals process. So incredible changes, incredible pressure, impact of performance. Health and safety is at the core of this issue. It's also at the heart of the solution.
Thank you, and we'll come on to some of those solutions you've perhaps had through this webinar. And perhaps on the other side of the spectrum, Richard and Andy both fit within the more of the retail elements of the industry. We know that it's performed very well. Richard, perhaps we could come to you first. Talk to us a bit about TP and the performance through this period of time.
Well, the group was in a particularly fortunate position, particularly compared to Amanda's experience. So other than one day, the group continued to trade throughout, providing support to essential construction work to keep the UK safe and secure throughout the whole of the pandemic. And I think whilst last year was clearly challenged for us, we gathered quite a good momentum in Q4, and you may have seen in our trading updates at the end of Q1 that like-for-like sales were up 17%, which was really positive, and that momentum's carried on. We've demerged our Wickes business, so Wickes is now a standalone PLC in its own right. And the challenge that we now face is that, and again, you may have seen it in the press, that there's a shortage of certain construction products, which means availability is going up, and there are price increases starting to hit the market as well. So it's been an interesting ride. It's not to say that we haven't been without our challenges. So as I said, last year was difficult for us. We did take the tough decision of closing about 160 branches across the group, and we had to say goodbye to excuse me, a number of colleagues and members of the family in doing so, but they were those branches where social distancing was particularly difficult to achieve, or they were just not going to perform in the future.
And Andy, if I can come to you, how has it been for the co-op, and obviously from your perspective from the property side of things?
Yeah, I mean, similar in many ways to Richard, and obviously very converse to Amanda's experience. So well placed in terms of being able to feed the nation, which was the coin phrase at the time, and be able to support on a very localized community level, which is our target market, if you like. So from a food business side, very, very strong performance on sales. Funeral care, obviously, with the very sort of tragic fallout from the pandemic, then it was great to be able to be in a position to support communities when people are going through the worst times in life. So that piece, really, I think we had the food business that was really, really strong. We had the funeral care business that was there to support, and thankfully we were able to play a major role in getting people through the worst of the pandemic. I know we're not through it yet, but certainly getting through the worst of it. And it's translated into probably being our best year for nearly 20 years, I suppose, in terms of sales. And sales and profit are very different, I suppose. So we do need to remember that, because there are obviously costs that all businesses are facing into in terms of how you facilitate and operate through the pandemic. And you know, we're no different from anyone else. We've had to incur a lot of cost to be able to keep the doors open and do what we need to do. I suppose from a property perspective, we've also then had a real role to play in terms of literally keeping the doors on and keeping them open, keeping the businesses trading and able to support people. And that's taken a lot of effort, a lot of thinking, a lot of planning, because there are various things that we do through a year, whether it's new space, refits, maintenance, that we've had to really think about, recut, reposition, and make sure that we don't get in the way of supporting the communities, but also keep the lights on. So that was a challenge, but thankfully we've got through it, I think. And I have to say our supply chain have been absolutely immense through this as well. We couldn't have done it without them. But it took an awful lot of planning, a lot of engagement to get us to where we are today.
Thank you. And Louise, for you and for those that don't know Siemens Mobility, because there's lots of different parts of Siemens, could you just give an overview of what Siemens Mobility does and then how COVID affected you?
Sure. So Siemens Mobility is our rail and transport business. So we manufacture, install, maintain railway signalling, trains and road vehicle traffic management. We continued to operate right the way through the pandemic. Although you would have seen plenty of stuff on the news about fewer people on trains, train services continued to operate, and the government was really adamant that that should be the case because it was about moving key workers and essential supplies around the country. And in fact, we did use our passenger trains at some stages to move essential medical supplies around the country when that was a real requirement. So we've continued to operate. Where there have been a reduction in trains in service, there's been an opportunity to do increased maintenance and perhaps to bring forward some infrastructure projects. So we've been working really closely with our clients to be engaging with that and supporting them. The Build Back Better agenda is really key for us. We're looking at an opportunity for major investment in infrastructure. And we've got a key role to play there, both on rail and on road. So yeah, we continued to operate. Our team were amazing. We very quickly sent sort of 50% of our workforce to work from home, all the support services working from home. And we sort of wrapped a bubble around our operational workforce to keep them as safe as we could in each of their operational bases. The HSEQ team were really key to that, working really closely with the business as the information that we had about the risk evolved. We kept adapting our procedures, but business performance has stayed strong and is looking strong this year with a really good forward pipeline. We've seen some changes of dates of major projects, but other than that, I think we've been very fortunate and our staff have been amazing.
Well, that's great to hear. And you mentioned something that I want to come on to now, and that's around how your HSE functions, each of you have been able to enable your businesses to perform as well as they can in these current times. So perhaps, Andy, to come back to you, could you talk to me about a particular success that you've seen through this period of time that your function has been able to facilitate for the wider organisation?
Yeah, sure. I mean, just touching on a point that Louise made a second ago, there's some very similar type activity that we did with the corporate teams. So there's sort of circa 4,000 people that we were able to very quickly get into a position where they could work effectively from home. But obviously most of our workforce, if you like, 60,000 people, colleagues, are either in shops or logistics depots or funeral care branches and what have you. From a property side, I suppose one of the big successes I would call out is the way in which we responded to the way that we control the sites, the work sites, so the construction sites, whether it's refit, new space extensions, all that kind of stuff. A lot of our supply chain you wouldn't class as being sort of tier one. You know, they're quite niche at some of what they do, and it's quite a small turnover type supply chain that we typically have, which means they don't have vast teams of safety professionals and risk professionals, environmental professionals to try and help them. And often we find as a client that we have to deploy a lot of our field teams, of which we're lucky to have a decent sized field team of RHSE pros internally in the property team, to be able to almost act as, I want to say free consultancy, but not quite, because that's a whole different discussion. But at the same time, we were able to support the supply chain so that we get the right things on site, and they actually were able to work in a really safe and effective way through the pandemic, because let's say they just didn't have that internal support. So it felt like it was a great opportunity for us to be really collaborative with our supply chain and show that we're in this together, but also it's actually changed some of the working practices going forward as well for the longer term. So we recognised that actually we were probably cutting some of the programmes maybe a little bit too tight in terms of closure dates and all that kind of stuff. And COVID has forced us to relook at the whole thing. And what we have realised is that we can actually offer a better outcome by adding a few extra days to the programme. And I hope the supply chain are not on this call, because if they hear that, they're going to think they can take 2 weeks. It's not about that, but there is a realisation that actually there's a different way of doing this. And that's just one big example we've had. The outcome at the end is far stronger than what we used to get pre-COVID.
Thank you. And Amanda, I think if I can come to you, the spotlight, I mentioned at the beginning the spotlight being on health and safety within this period, but I think the spotlight was also very much on our major airports, and that, you know, none bigger than Heathrow. So I'm sure from your role, you've been in some high profile situations with this. Could you talk to us about what your function has done to enable those passengers that are needing to travel to still travel effectively and safely, and also to keep the organisation moving forward?
Thanks, Josh. I asked my team what our successes were before this meeting, actually, because I was really interested in their views, and I wholeheartedly agree with their responses, which is we were part of the solutions working with our operational teams. We moved, I would say, from advisors to enablers and part of the solutions, because at the start of this, none of us had any muscle memory about handling a global pandemic, did we? We didn't have the rule book, we didn't have the guidance, though it emerged, and quickly. So my team stood up to the mark, like Louise and Andrew have said, really stood up and played their part in working with the business to find solutions. And I would say to lead solutions, because at the start of this, in terms of the controls available to us to manage these issues, they were right down our hierarchy of controls, weren't they? We didn't have the eliminate or isolate, that's coming with vaccinations and testing. We didn't have that. So we're down with PPE and social distancing, etc. But at the start of this, we saw that the way out of this as an industry was vaccinations and testing. Vaccinations outside of our control, but testing not. And so actually what Heathrow has done has led the way in terms of, at the very early stages, looking at how testing can be part of the solution for passengers and colleagues, and has done some fantastic work working with suppliers. Andrew, your point really resonated with me. We couldn't have done what we've done without our strategic partners or our suppliers. Huge collaboration, but leading the way, not waiting for the answers from other people because they weren't there, but being part of the solutions, in some cases taking the lead. And I think that is helping us to emerge from this in a safe way, because the importance is travelling safety and enable safe travel, and also influencing government policy on this. So one of the things I've spent far more time doing in the last year is working with local community leaders and working with my colleagues and through them into government to influence policy on safe travel.
Thank you. And Richard, to come to you, what's been your best success, do you believe, in this period of time for you and your team?
I think the safety team have been in the thick of it from the off, just like everybody's, everyone on this call, I'm sure, and hugely proud of what the team have achieved. And if you can cast your mind back to the start of this, there was a period just after lockdown was said, you're not going out, you're staying at home. And there was a period of time between that and when the government released their COVID secure guidance, when there wasn't any guidance, as Amanda's alluded to. And very much, I was really pleased with the way the team sort of filled that gap and actually just went back to some real basic occupational health and hygiene risk management principles, to the point you've said, Amanda. And you know, not only did the business embrace that, and it just reinforced actually the importance of risk assessment and safe ways of working without having to go on a training course or anything bonkers like that, because it was in the moment, it was now. That was brilliant. That work has influenced our sector. So we work with the Builders Merchants Federation to set the standard and to help others in our sector that, you know, that don't enjoy a safety team that Travis has got, and worked with BEIS to do likewise across the broader industry. So really proud of that. And actually, so it wasn't just a that's it, tick and move on. Clearly, you know, the pandemic, it just changed overnight, didn't it? So very much the team were working in the thick of it with our businesses, pivoting, thinking through different ways of operating models. So one day Toolstation would be set up one day, you know, one way, and then within a day they would have pivoted because of different thinking, different guidance, but they would have changed their estate of 450 odd stores. You know, really, really remarkable, not only for the safety team, but the operational business that really got into that. And, you know, it would be wrong if I didn't call out particularly my team, specifically because in a 3-month, maybe 4-month period, they visited every one of the group's 2,000 locations, never been done before, to go and do a COVID assurance visit. Now, yeah, it might have been binary, have you got it or not? But the biggest impact from that was our colleagues saying, oh, thanks, you've just assured us a bit, because there was so much anxiety around that. And I don't underestimate the personal ask that we asked of our teams to do that, and also our frontline colleagues. So, you know, a lot to be proud of. And actually on the back of it, along with other issues that have sort of happened, we've invested quite heavily in our safety resource. So, you know, we've strengthened our approach as well, which again is testament to I think what the business thinks of safety and its importance.
Thank you. And it's a really good point that you made there with regards to that reassurance for the colleagues. And I think the stress, the uncertainty of COVID, and also the uncertainty of people's jobs that, you know, through this period of time has been really tough. And it brings us on to mental health. And Louise, if I could come to you around this. We've seen some really innovative ideas from different organisations. Just last month or the month before, we were hosting a webinar with Jacobs and their 1 Million Lives tool that they've been made open source for everybody to utilise for check-ins. But we've heard from a recruiter's perspective lots of client demand around health and safety, more from the health perspective in this period of time. So Louise, how has mental health been positioned within Siemens Mobility? What things have you been coming up with, and any successes that you could share with the audience today around that?
Sure, yeah. I think we realised very early on that mental health and well-being was going to be at least as important as physically keeping people safe. And we'd done many of the things that the other panellists had mentioned in terms of COVID secure premises and everything else. And we were doing lots to support the people that we'd sent out to work from home, because we were very mindful that all of a sudden they were cut off from their colleagues, and we were having lots of calls and talking about mental well-being with them. And we got a very strong message very quickly from our operational staff, who said, well, it's all very well for you guys tucked up at home where you're safe. What about us? We're out there with this killer virus. And that was a real pivot point for us as a leadership team, because we realised we've got two populations with very different needs. And we pulled together a cross-functional group to work collaboratively on what we called our In This Together programme. They very quickly did a pulse survey out to all of the employees, and we've continued to do that about once a month right the way through the pandemic, just checking in with people, how they're feeling, or, you know, happy face scale, and what the things are that they think are going really well and the things that they're worried about. And then we built a package of interventions around the things that people were worried about. And that's evolved as we've gone through the pandemic. So initially, lots of people were worried about their physical fitness because they felt cooped up, whereas the guys out on site were worried about infection control. And as time moved on, people started to feel the effects of isolation. They were struggling with homeschooling. The operational staff were struggling because they were out all day and then going home to a family that had been cooped up at home, and there were family tensions. We built this program that is still in place and continues to evolve, and I think this is something we're going to keep post-pandemic, this idea of being in this together. So we've had all sorts of things: nutrition, fatigue management, sleep advice, homeschooling. We had a fantastic educational psychologist came and talked about the psychological aspects of homeschooling and giving people hints and tips about how to manage that. We did lots with our occupational health provider around helping the operational staff to understand the infection control aspects and what they could do to keep themselves safe and not be taking virus home to their family. So it's continued to evolve. We're now into new sessions around the new normal and what that's going to mean. As a business, we've decided we're not going back to how we used to work before. For people who are office based, it'll be a blended approach to work, maybe 2 to 3 days a week in the office, rest of the time from home. What does that mean? How do you manage your diary effectively that way and still create opportunities for collaboration? What's the office going to look like when you go back and you don't have your own allocated desk anymore? So we're taking that program on now into the new normal. I think it's been a key success for us. It's not just about the topics that we've talked about. It's the way that we've engaged and the communication channel that's brought us all closer together as an organisation.
Thank you for that. And Amanda, I know that you, when we were speaking last month about this, you mentioned that you're not referring to mental health within your organisation, but mental fitness. Could you just give a bit of an overview of that and what that means for you and your team and Heathrow employees?
Thanks, Josh. And like Louise, I certainly recognise almost everything she said around the issues with home working, people working from home, video operation seems to be common amongst the panelists here, the issues that we're dealing with, I'm sure people on the call. And similarly, we've done a lot to support the different issues that colleagues find themselves in, home working, working on frontline, etc. Something that Louise sort of ended her contribution there around communication. So people's uncertainty, the demands on them, the uncertainty, the lack of control, the level of change, the pace of change, all contributing to their health and well-being, or not as the case may be. So we've looked to understand each of those and look to weave in our wellbeing support through the key issues that are changing at Heathrow, whether it's changing terms and conditions, whether it's people home working, and providing colleagues and managers with resources to support them through those issues and those conversations. In addition to that, what we're now moving to work on is mental fitness, as you've said, Josh, and that's in addition to all of the support that we provide to colleagues and line managers. And that's about helping all of our colleagues understand their own mental fitness, take control of their own mental fitness, and have tools and techniques available to them. We've all got mental fitness like we've all got physical fitness, and we're changing the language to be very inclusive, and it's about equipping colleagues. We've run sessions with some of our executive team and some of our leadership teams, and we're starting to roll those out through our trade unions, through our security colleagues in particular, our line managers and the front line. And it's all in pursuit of helping people understand what they can change for themselves, and also for them to get some perspective on issues, and really importantly, them taking control, because one of the biggest stressors in the last 17 months has been the lack of control. So that's a key outcome that we're seeking.
Thank you. And something that we'll go to the audience for now, and I'll get Andy and Richard for your perspective on this, is where mental health fitness sits within an organisation. So the poll that I'd like you all to answer is, from a strategic perspective, where does the strategic responsibility for mental health and wellbeing sit within your organisation? So if we could have the poll on the screen, please. It'd be great if you could fill this out, and then Andy and Richard will get you to comment on the findings and perhaps talk a bit about how it sits within your organisation. Obviously, we haven't been able to give every single option that there is, but I think it generally would sit somewhere between health and safety and HR, but there is the other tool. So if we give just 10 more seconds. And will we be able to see the results, please? So I think it's quite varied, actually, more varied than perhaps I would have anticipated. Andy, maybe if I could come to you, where does mental health or fitness sit within the co-op, and what are your thoughts on the results?
Yeah, interesting results. I actually had to go at the survey when it came up, to be honest, and for me it sits across all of the leadership teams in the co-op. There's a slight nuance to that, I suppose, in so much as the pre-pandemic view of where does it sit would have been very much health and safety and HR, probably more health and safety, to be honest. We've had to really look at this over the last 14 months or so, and I think it's now much more evenly spread against all the leadership teams. What's helped us is, to take the positive from what is a terrible situation. We've had to develop toolkits and policies, and similar to some of the stuff that Louise and Amanda have touched on, resources that we can give to colleagues that they can tap into. But actually, there's a real emphasis and a switch in thinking now to being responsible for your own mental health, mental fitness, and some of the stuff that we've brought in to underpin that. So as I say, these resources where we signpost people to certain things, we've got third-party providers that help us with different bits. We've got a new training program, but the emphasis is very much on things like resilience, and we've used effectively some really good guest speakers in the past, sort of 12 months, to come in and talk to us about resilience and what it means and how to take real responsibility for yourself, and also then what to do when it's not going well. And that has really changed us completely, actually, because very few people used to truly speak up when it wasn't going well, and now we're finding people are far more open to saying, listen, this is not good for me, I'm having a real tough time, I need some help. And they're also, the really nice thing that is probably a big success off the back of this is they're also now looking out for each other as well. So we've got colleagues who are spotting, without being mental health first aiders and all that kind of stuff, they're just naturally spotting where people are not quite at themselves, or something, early signs that all is not right, and we're able to then intervene. So that toolkit coming together and this openness that the world has changed and you're able to talk freely and ask for help and support, I think is a bit of a game changer for us. But what it has meant is we've had to go right across the organisation.
And what about with you, Richard?
I was trying to work out where the mute button was there, Josh, sorry. So where does it sit? That is a good question. I think for us, it really goes back to what's the point of us being a group of companies. So one of the advantages of being a group of companies is that you can leverage your position and go quicker with certain things, and that was certainly the thinking in where wellbeing sits now. So from a structure, thought leadership, direction type of position, that's owned by me and the group wellbeing manager. So there's that level of thinking, and then very much HR and operations own the sort of business implementation on the basis that they know their people better than anybody else. But what I would say is there's so much space to dance in here. I don't, whilst I may, notionally own the structure and the direction, does that mean I do that in isolation? No, of course it doesn't. That means I spend a lot of time talking to my colleagues in HR, my colleagues in operations, external people for benchmarking, panelists here, speak to Lou a fair bit on stuff as well. So, I think there's a load of room, and I think the message out of all of this pandemic really is that You know, and I think Neil Birdworth said it on the sort of trailer into the session that, you know, there's a huge opportunity for health and well-being with this pandemic, and it's just brought it to the fore. You know, and don't get me wrong, it's not that we didn't think well-being was important before. We absolutely did. It's just that it's got really loud now. You know, the noise, and actually, and it plays to what I've always believed, that well-being has to be a pull from the individual, not a push from the organisation, for various reasons. And, you know, Andrew was talking about there with people calling stuff out. We've had more and more of that, and that just says to me, now's the time to really press on and do it. And we've made some, you know, some really great inroads that I'm you know, would we have done it without the pandemic? Yeah, we would have done. I'd like to think we would, but would we be this far ahead? No, we wouldn't be.
And Amanda, just to come to you lastly on this point, obviously your title is health, safety and wellbeing, which is, you know, unique amongst the panelists to have wellbeing within your actual title. Perhaps it's within others' responsibility, but how does it sit within Heathrow, and what's your perspective on that?
It didn't until last March, and I was asked to take on health and wellbeing as well. I report into the people function, and we did have it all wrapped up together under by health, safety, wellbeing, governance. We've absolutely seen far more reporting to and interest from the executive and our board. Like others, I'm sure, go very regularly to board to talk about safety and health and wellbeing matters. But on a monthly basis now, the theme is generally COVID and health and wellbeing issues. And just this week, actually, we agreed at our executive subcommittee for safety, health and wellbeing, that we still didn't have enough time to get into health and wellbeing as much as we should do for the future. And given the relationship with line management capability, with organisational design, with reward, and those factors, that actually we will move executive oversight into the people committee, which is something I wanted and has been supported. So that's where we are. More interest and oversight and support than we've ever had, which is I'm sure, as Richard's just described, are experiencing too. Like Richard's described, of course, the operationalisation of what we determine we need to do is very much with and through operations teams, comms teams and others.
Yes, and you mentioned there with regards to the profile, I suppose, of wellbeing, and the next point I wanted to come on to is if we just take HSE as in total, in terms of the profile that has. When we reflected on this last 12 months ago, we asked the wider audience what percentage do they feel it would improve or decrease the profile of HSE within the organisation. I think 75% thought that it would be an extremely positive thing for their functions. So again, I'd like to speak to the audience and ask them, how has this been since COVID, and how would you describe the perception of HSE within your organisation? So if we could have the poll on the screen, has it impacted extremely positively through to extremely negatively? And again, I'll ask a few of the panelists their thoughts on this. Just 5 more seconds. And if we could see the results, please. So yeah, so we can see 84% either positively or extremely positively impacted. I think from our perspective, that is what we're seeing across the industry. I suppose the question is, and perhaps if I could come to you, Andy, on this one, how do you use that increased profile to your advantage?
I mean, that's a great question. And with it being macabre and trying to, you know, benefit from a horrendous situation, I think the way to use it, leverage it, whatever you want to call, is to sort of role model what we've done, which is very much, I think, through the last 14 months, people have been looking to us and our teams to make some big decisions and some big calls, because in times of real technical expertise requirements, we don't often, incident management aside, we don't often get pulled into a lot of these in the moment discussions at the senior levels, I think, although we've all got titles of directors and heads and all the rest of it. I think this kind of thing is showing you where we make our money. It plays to some of the thinking that I've got at the moment around what is the role of health and safety 5-10 years from now, which I don't think is the traditional role. I think this kind of risk management in the moment, agile expertise piece is the thing that we've picked up through this piece. How do you leverage it? I think it is just using it every day. So the wins that we've had and that we've identified, actually making them something that I would call not launch and leave. So we have to embed them. We will get through this pandemic. Of course we will. There might be another one, who knows? But there will be other times where some of the learns from the pandemic we need to really land. And I think the health agenda, especially the mental health piece, is something we can take forward and show the benefit that we can bring as a profession into these areas. And there's other wins as well. There's far more tactical stuff that, as I say, we're doing with supply chains that have a longer lasting effect. And then just keeping the conversation alive is probably the biggest piece. So the conferences, the CIGs that we run and all that kind of thing. Don't just let these things, the great work that we've had to do because we've been forced to, don't let them fall by the wayside.
And of course, I'm speaking to the four of you who hold very senior positions within large organisations with commitment from the executive teams that was there way before the pandemic. If Lou, if I could come to you, perhaps for individuals that perhaps work within smaller organisations that perhaps didn't have that profile before or haven't got the reporting line perhaps into the chief executive, how would you recommend that they could perhaps try to leverage that position better or to utilise this to their advantage to help the culture of the business from an HSE perspective?
I think what's happened is that the pandemic has shone a light on HSE professionals as providers of solutions in the midst of all the confusion when nobody really knew what was the right thing to do. We went back to our first principles, those basic principles of risk management that are so ingrained in us, and we worked out how to help businesses keep going. And I think that's the thing that will be the differentiator going forwards. Perhaps traditionally we've been seen as the department that puts barriers in the way, and that's turned on its head. All of a sudden we're providers of solutions based on those core principles. So I think that's the thing that everyone can leverage to really focus on continuing to be the facilitators of solutions that make a real positive difference in the business. For lots of organisations, without people who were able to do that, they would have had to shut down because they couldn't have continued to operate safely. And it's been the safety professionals able to make those risk-based decisions or inform the making of risk-based decisions that allowed businesses to keep functioning wherever it was within the guidelines. So I think that's the thing to leverage, that change in the view of the profession, if you like.
For sure, and Andy's already mentioned it, and I had a couple of other things I wanted to talk about. I'm just conscious of time and making sure we can get onto the audience's questions. So the last question I'd like to pose to you before we go to that is those characteristics of the health and safety profession, or if we can focus on perhaps the leader of the profession. I think a few of you have summarised it in this ever-changing legislative environment where government guideline was quite frequently from day to day being the polar opposite. Technical competence to a degree was something that nobody had in this field. So what are those characteristics of the future professional or the future leader, so that there's things that people within the audience can think about and work towards? And I suppose it's already been mentioned around the risk perspective, and Andy, your title being Chief Risk Safety and Programs Officer, but is that the place we're coming from? Why broader risk management? Is that where everything, I suppose, kind of stems from at the beginning? I'd like a few views on that. So perhaps Richard, to start with you, where do you think the profession's going, and what are the key characteristics of the future leader?
So my personal view is that, yeah, absolutely, it all comes down to risk, and there's an opportunity there if we want to. So certainly I spend more and more of my time talking about risk and oversight and providing assurance that we're managing our risks effectively, whatever that might be. Just so happens today I'm talking to you about HSE and COVID, this afternoon, I'll probably be talking about our commercial fleet. So it's all there. I think my sort of advice for anyone, and it's a conversation that I had with my leadership team the other day in our weekly check-in, was COVID's going to be around in some form for a while. So at some point, it almost needs to transition into, and I don't mean this the way it's going to come across, but it's just another hazard we have to contend with in the workplace. So we have to manage that. That's a given. At some point, we need to get out of the weeds of managing COVID. And let's face it, we've all got it now. Our muscle memories kind of forgot some of the other stuff. This is all just in the moment dealing with it. And I was thinking, because I thought you might ask me this question, I thought, what's the answer that's going to help Richard Byrne when he was 20 years ago as a safety officer at Midlands Co-op? It would have probably been do a list of stuff that says, where am I weeding? Where am I forever in the weeds? And where am I actually growing safety? And just always make sure that that balance is right. Because if I think back through all the roles I've had, and including this one, at some point, I always find myself doing that and just checking in. So I do think there is a place for all of us to just step back and think.
Thank you. And Amanda, what about from your perspective?
Well, I completely agree with what Richard said in terms of what we should be focusing on. So perhaps if I think about the how and the leadership capabilities, I think developing and leveraging relationships has got to be a key feature of the capability of a leader. Providing psychological safety for the team, because we don't always have the solutions, but enabling the team to feel safe to make the best decisions they can at the time with the information available, because that's what we've been doing through this pandemic, trying to make the best decisions with the information available. Influencing capability, of course, which is based on trust, which goes back to developing relationships and networks, and being resilient and having confidence in your own decision making, because I think Andrew said people have been coming to us to make really big decisions. So I think a combination of characteristics in addition to more of a risk-based focus, not forgetting them, being proud of who we are as safety professionals, the technical capability we've got, and to Louise's point, actually how that training in very early stages of our careers have served us through this.
Thank you. And Louise and Andy, I'll leave it open to one of you to answer that before we move on to the questions from the audience. Do either of you have a particular perspective on that you'd like to share?
I will, if that's okay. I think underpinning all of this is authenticity. You need to be yourself. There's so much pressure on safety professionals to be to have a particular style, behave in a particular way. It never works. If you're operating outside your own style, you always come across as being a little bit stilted and a little bit false. So really get to know yourself. Use a profiling system, talk to your colleagues, really understand yourself and your own style and how you best influence, because it's different for every single one of us. And I think understanding where we're strong, understanding development needs and working on those is the biggest thing we can do, because that will underpin the building of relationships, the building of trust, getting that profile right in the organisation and allowing you to move forward as that coach, that facilitator, or the subject matter expert as your business needs you to be.
Thank you. So if we can go to some of the questions from the audience, Paul Madders has asked, and Andy, I'll come to you. As we ease off, how do we ensure that our people don't get complacent?
That's a great question. Well done, Paul. That's something that we're talking about all the time. I have to say, how do we make sure they don't get complacent? Is keeping the conversation alive. So it's not dancing on the graves of the past, but actually just keeping it alive and taking the learnings and squeezing another 1%, 2%, 3% of benefit from them where we can. So I think the wins that we've had to take forward, there's things that was, I use that phrase before launch and leave, there's things that were just for a moment in the pandemic that we don't probably need to resurface, but the things that we know that are adding benefit and value are now part of our daily drumbeat and they're part of our planning processes and all that stuff. And I think that's the best way to keep it alive, if you like.
Thank you. Amanda, something you mentioned earlier links to Michael Stegeman's question. Are you able to give an idea of the magnitude increase in PPE spend from pre-COVID to during the midst of everything?
Do you know, I don't know the actual answer. The answer is it's millions. At the start of this, we recognised that PPE face coverings would be a significant issue for us, and we bought what we could at the time, donated some of it thereafter. But I suppose one of the reasons I don't know the exact answer to that is because our spend on anything COVID related has never been an issue.
And that was
It's
from
always
day
been
one.
From day one, what do you need from our executive? Just what do you need? And if in doubt, buy what you need. And it was absolute, get what you need, and we'll deal with it later. So the absolute trust from the executive team to the Red Room, a small group of us that meet daily. Did meet daily now a few times a week, actually, to lead the response. We had absolute trust and no constraints, and that's why I don't know the answer.
Well, that's pleasing to hear. Richard, a question from Judith Ward. For those businesses who have needed to vigorously restructure to survive, how do you plan to replace skill sets when it comes to building back better? Because considering many industries were already experiencing issues with skills, and that obviously many of those good people are now redeployed elsewhere, what's the plan of talent, and how do you deal with that?
Well, there's a little bit of first principles here that hopefully the talent was retained in the organisation, I guess you would think. But more generally, it plays to a bigger conversation around talent development and succession. So certainly if I think of our business, 10th largest commercial fleet in the UK, we have thousands of drivers, and we are playing in a high demand, low supply employment market. So very much it's about, in this space, thinking about how do we stand out from the crowd to make our jobs the most attractive? What are the advantages in joining our organisation? How do we grow you? If you join us as a driver, does that mean that you just stay as a driver forever? No, we've got an example of someone that started as a driver with us and retired recently as having been the managing director of one of the largest regions in Travis Perkins. So it's all there, and I think that equally applies to the safety profession. So we're very much thinking about our own talent and succession, and how do we continue to grow people. Hopefully organisations were doing that beforehand. And it just means that, like lots of other things, we just need to don't forget the basics and keep going.
For sure, absolutely. And I think from our perspective, we've seen the lack of succession planning really affecting some businesses that have been engaging with us. And, I suppose it perhaps links on to succession planning, but also business continuity planning, and how wide that can actually be. And we have a question with regards to business continuity. If I could just find it. It's following the pandemic, how are business community plans now being developed with the lessons that we've learned from it? Perhaps Lou, if I could come up to you.
Sure. It's a bit early. So we geared up our crisis management team sort of mid-March 2020, and we're still running. We still had the crisis open because the pandemic isn't over yet. Initially we were meeting twice a day. Now we meet once a week. We've scaled it back, and we've gone up and back several times during the course of the pandemic. So in terms of the continuity plans, it's a bit early to be reviewing that. But we have absolutely proved that our crisis management plan works really, really well. And we're now looking at how that reflects down into the businesses and where we can make tweaks and make that a bit more sustainable for the future. And I think that's the key thing. I think businesses need to not fall into the sort of pitfall of refocusing and replanning around a pandemic, because we never knew this was coming. No one saw this coming. It was probably a line on the risk register somewhere for everybody, but we didn't know this was going to be the thing. And the next thing won't be this. It'll be something different. So focus on the systems and the procedures that have allowed you to adapt to what's required and keep the business going, rather than getting caught in the trap of focusing on how to plan for the next pandemic.
Thank you. Something around that, I suppose you mentioned about thinking about the systems and the processes. A question that we've had is, has anybody managed to encourage accident, incident, audit, observation whilst individuals have been working from home or in a more remote setting? So has anybody been able to utilise, with the remote and technology world that we live in now, more of a less on-site approach to any of those aspects?
Yeah, I can give an example of that, Josh, if it helps. I mean, we moved to a FaceTime type approach for the site inspections at the real height of the pandemic, the first wave, if you like. Now there's an element of trust, a huge element of trust on that, because what site, thinking to site managers, if they were of an unscrupulous type of nature, they might decide to only show you the good stuff on the site, and it's up to the person on the other end to direct a little bit. But that, all kidding aside, that really did work well for us and gave our internal field teams a bit of confidence that we weren't just going to blindly send them onto sites when we didn't really understand the full picture of what we were dealing with. That very, very basic technology worked really well and had a huge impact on morale and people thinking, actually, the business has got my back here, and I'm not going to be forced to go and do something I'm really uncomfortable with. So that was just one little example.
Great. I'm conscious of time, so we probably have the last question to ask now. And there was one that came from Barry Parker. What, if any, outside of the norm, hygiene solutions have been implemented, and were any of them innovative or different from what you'd had previously?
Could I answer this?
Yes.
So the answer is yes, and yes. And I think perhaps one of the most innovative solutions that we put in was our UV robots that at night come to life under supervision, I hasten to add, and safely, and clean various areas around the airports, including the loos and front of house areas. And if any of you watch Heathrow's busiest airport, which I don't tend to after a day at Heathrow, but if any of you do, one of the recent episodes featured the robots, and they've all got names, and I'm doing my best to get one named Amanda, but I'm not doing very well so far.
Well, thank you for that, and sorry for those of you who have asked questions that we haven't been able to answer. What the panel have promised me is that we'll divvy out the questions. We'll get them tidied up into an email that we'll share with you all alongside the slide deck, so that you can have that. I think the last thing that I'd like to say, other than thank you to the panelists, is just to talk a bit about Safety for Good and just to remind you of what we're here to do. This Inside Safety series is for insights and information from leading figures within the world of health and safety to give back to the community. And it underpins the overall message of Safety for Good, which is about raising the positive profile of this profession. We're so passionate, working from a recruitment perspective, but in the health and safety industry, about how we can improve the profile, how we can encourage new entrants into the industry. There was a number of questions I had to ask today that I haven't got round to talk about that and to facilitate some discussion. But for us, it's really important that the focus around HSE continues beyond the pandemic into the years to come, because we're so delighted to be part of this industry. We play a good part in helping individuals on that journey. But this industry really has played the biggest factor through this pandemic. And so to all of you, both panelists and attendees, to say thank you for the things that you've put into your organisations to help protect the lives of all of your colleagues. I think it's really important for us to say that, and it's exactly the founding reasons of Safety for Good is all of these things that you've done. So with Safety for Good, we have a number of different strands. The next upcoming thing we have is our new wave of Future Leaders mentoring. Some of you that are on this will be part of it already, but our Future Leaders mentoring is a way in which we pair you with executive coaches within HSE to help develop you in your career. So when we send the slide deck around, there's a form if you're interested in finding out more to fill in. Please click the link and fill that in, and one of our team will be in contact with you to talk about Future Leaders Mentoring. And if anybody has any questions for us or the panelists outside of this session, then please get in contact with Principal People or myself directly, and we'll be delighted to help. So thank you to the panelists. Really appreciate your time. I know you've all got very busy schedules, so we really do appreciate that. And yeah, wish you all the best with your endeavours throughout the rest of 2021. And to our audience, thank you for joining. We look forward to hearing from you soon. So thank you very much.